Hey everyone, welcome to the video. In this video, I want to talk about the role of the intellect from the perspective of Fyodor Dostoevsky, Carl Jung, and then I want to talk through how it can become pathological, how thinking can be a disease, to quote Dostoevsky, and then hopefully I want to give you some practical applications in terms of how to take what I'm talking about in this video and implement it in your daily life. So, what is the intellect? It goes by many words. We refer to it as rationality, as reason, as intelligence, although there are scientific ways of defining all of these things. I feel like the average person uses those words synonymously. And from my perspective, the intellect is just one's capacity to think, and you can think about thinking as abstracted or simulated behavior. When you think about a problem, what you're doing is you're imagining different scenarios playing out in your head that deal with solving that problem, and you conjure up different solutions and you imagine yourself acting them out, or you imagine different scenarios playing out, and then you select the best one that you feel is good for you, and then you act out that intellectually generated simulation. And you could argue that that's potentially the purpose of thinking. It's to help you imagine different behavioral solutions before implementing them in reality, because if you act something out that's stupid, well, then you could get hurt or you could die. So there's obviously a benefit to having the intellect, but like many things that have evolved over time, rather it relate to our physiology or to our psychology, there are trade-offs. One of the ways you can think of the trade-off that comes with thinking, I believe, was best illustrated by Fyodor Dostoevsky, who was a Russian novelist. He wrote many books, and one of the books that I'm going to use for this video is called Notes from Underground. And in that book, the protagonist doesn't have a name, he's just called the Underground Man. And he is a 40-year-old or middle-aged man, a middle-aged government bureaucrat living in the late 1800s in Russia. And the book is essentially a confession of the ways in which he has suffered through life and the potential causes of his own suffering. And this man is highly intellectual. He's very intelligent. He has the ability to generate many different ideas about many different things. But along with his great intellect comes this pride and nihilism and cynicism and this type of hyper rationality that makes other things, other components of our personality, such as emotions and motivations, seem like they're wrong. The Underground Man doesn't really understand the average person. In some ways, he admires people who think less, because he feels that his overthinking and his hyper rationality impedes his ability to act. Because when you act in reality, you have to be confident, and there's not a lot of time for thinking. Although you can make the argument that you're doing thinking and acting at the same time, what the Underground Man is trying to say is that when you're thinking, you can often become paralyzed by too much analysis, because you're trying to think through all of the different scenarios, all the different factors, all of the what ifs. And he believes that the average man who thinks less maybe can be impulsive, but at least has the tenacity to act and to do something and to be decisive and to be proactive. And that's something that he finds as a fault in himself for being too intellectual, but he can't help it. It seems to be a part of his temperament, and it also seems to be a part of the greater culture at that time, and I think it's still true to this day. And so the Underground Man struggles to make friends because he doesn't understand people. He ends up going to this party in one scene after he swindles some distant acquaintances into inviting him to the party. And while he's there, instead of celebrating and joining in conversations and having fun and laughing with all the other people, he just sits there brooding for hours, noticeably. And part of the reason that he is brooding is because, one, he doesn't understand why people do the things that they do, which are seemingly irrational to him. But two, he also has this narcissism that is in part caused by his awareness of his own intellect, to the point where he feels that other people should bow at his feet and should be less interested in the mundane topics that they're discussing, and they should be more interested in these profound and marvelous ideas that he's thinking up. He feels that with his great intellect and with his hyper rationality, the ideas and theories that he comes across are the most important things in the world that anyone should be thinking about if they were rational and if they were reasonable. And so he has this self-inflicting proclivity to inhibit his social relationships, to where he's awkward or he's overbearing, and he just, again, doesn't understand other people. And so our ability to think is amazing. Our ability to intellectualize phenomena is great. At the same time, it has trade-offs, and if it goes too far, it can lead to a lot of psychological distress in our inner experiences, in our jobs, in our daily lives, and even in our social functioning. And this was something that Carl Jung also understood. So Carl Jung was a Swiss psychiatrist in working in the early to mid 1900s, and he was also well read in Dostoevsky. And so Jung associated the intellect with what he called the ego. So he, with his theory, along with working with people like Alfred Adler and Sigmund Freud, created an understanding of the human psyche such that there are different components. Most people think that they are a singular individual, and from some levels of analysis that's true, but in terms of the model that Jung had, he asserted that you were a synthesis of many different sub-personalities. You weren't necessarily one whole thing, but you had these different subcomponents or sub-personalities, that's what I'll call them, that interacted with each other and could come into conflict, and that could become a source of distress and suffering. And so for Jung, the individual psyche had a persona, which is the outward facing mask. It's the social mask that we wear whenever we want to adhere to the expectations of other people, so that way things could be at peace. You have your persona, you have your ego, and that is associated with when you think of yourself and when you're talking to yourself, when you're alone in your car with your own thoughts, that's your ego. And Jung also associated the ego with the intellect and with reason. We'll come back to that. Within your psyche was also things like your shadow, which is all those parts of your personality that you don't pay attention to. In men, there was the anima, and then in women, there's the animus, and I won't go into that. And then just finally, there's the connection to the collective unconscious. And the point of really illustrating all those other sub-personalities is just to highlight that under Jung's model, and this is aligned, again, with other psychological thinkers, the intellect is one part of your personality. You have many other sub-personalities that have evolved to help you solve various situations in your physical and social environment. And so to elevate the intellect to the highest thing, from the perspective of Jung, was not the correct thing to do. Going back to the ego, Jung believed that the purpose of the ego, again, with its reason and its intellect, was to draw attention to the components of your unconscious, let's say your instincts, your motivations, and your emotions, such that they can be given a voice, such that when you're having an emotion, or perhaps when you have a nightmare, or when you just have regular dreams or you have waking fantasies, Jung believed that those were attempts from the unconscious to express something to you that needed to be expressed. And Jung believed that the purpose of the ego was to explicate those expressions. So, for example, maybe you have a dream that is filled with some sort of emotion, and there's a whole bunch of images about your past or potentially about something you have no idea about. And Jung would say the purpose of the ego is to capture that dream either in articulated form, perhaps you could talk about it, or to write it down. That way you can analyze it and bring to bear onto the dream something that's supposedly irrational and inarticulate, some sort of rationality, so that way it could be understood. And so that was the purpose of intellect for Jung. Now, Jung believed that the ideal personality, which he called the self, perhaps sometimes it's the capital S self, it was not just the ego. The ego, again, is one subpersonality that is working alongside many other different subpersonalities. The self, the ideal personality, can be characterized by a harmonious dynamic and a balanced relationship between all of these different subpersonalities. And so the intellect is not overbearing and always trying to hyper rationalize everything, and it's not always trying to suppress emotions, for example. That's something that can sometimes happen, and that's something that our culture seems to take pride in certain spheres, where we say that emotions are irrational, therefore they're bad, and people should be rational. They should use their intellect, use their logical intelligence. And while, again, there is a time and place for the intellect, there's also a time and place for emotions. And just because something's irrational, that doesn't mean that it's bad. Anyway, Jung believed that the integrated personality was one that was characterized by a balance between all these different subpersonalities. And the process of turning yourself into a personality that is more integrated is by giving voice to all of those different parts of your subpersonality. Just like I mentioned in the dream example, where you have this experience, you have this fantasy or this emotion or something within you speaks to you, for lack of better terms. Oftentimes what people will do is suppress it, but Jung said, no, you need to listen to it. You need to first realize that it's trying to say something to you. 2, you need to listen to it. And then 3, you can reflect on it and try to understand, what is it saying? Is it trying to help you develop a part of your personality that's been underdeveloped? Is it making a prediction about something that's going to happen in the future? Or is it trying to communicate something to you about what's going on presently? And it was that process of continually giving voice to the unconscious and then using your reason and rationality to analyze it that would help you become a greater person, for lack of better terms. Okay, so how can we translate this into something that people can do every day? I've got 3 steps in my mind. And these are quite general because while I'm trying to focus on the ego and the intellect, for Jung, psychopathology and neurotic conditions, as they called them back in the day, can manifest due to an imbalance between any of these subpersonalities. So maybe one person might have an overbearing intellect where another person might have an unintegrated shadow, or another person might have something related to their lust that is unintegrated or is even suppressed, and that's causing some sort of distress in their lives. And so these are general principles that I feel like can help with any personality imbalance, again, from a Jungian standpoint. So the first step is to set your goal. It's to ask yourself, what kind of life would you like to have? And pulling from Jordan Peterson, you can segregate your life into different domains. And so, do you want an intimate partner? Do you want friends? Do you want a job? Do you want to go to church? Do you feel like there's something spiritually lacking in your life? And you can ask yourself these questions, and then you can write about how you would like your life to look. And so the first step is to set goals about your life. The second step would be to investigate one of those domains and continue to reflect and meditate about how your current life is not aligned with the ideal or with that goal that you've set to yourself, set for yourself. And then the third step would be to use your conscious intellect at this point to develop strategies and habits that can help you move from your current state in life, in that specific domain that you're investigating, closer to, and then move closer to your goal. And then you just repeat step 2 and 3 for different domains. And part of what this process can entail is a daily habit of reflection where you meditate on unconscious dynamics such as your dreams or just your emotions, or you can think about something that happened yesterday that made you angry, and you can ask yourself, well, why did you get angry? Were you just having a bad day? Was it something specific about what someone said? Or was it something that happened in the morning that you carried into the afternoon that led you to be a little more on edge? And you can just try to listen to yourself and see what it is that your unconscious, tries to tell you, your consciousness. And this also is predicated to a large degree on your belief that your goals are something that you truly want. Because many people will not set goals, or they will set false goals, so that way they don't have to admit to themselves that their lives are actually worse than they actually are. And so you have to actually want the goal. That's something that I should have said earlier. But again, this practice can involve a daily meditation, or you reflect on past emotions, past dreams, past memories. You can write down these experiences as they are, and then you can write down how you feel about the experiences in the present as you're reflecting on them. And then you can analyze how these past experiences and current feelings are associated with the goals that you have set for yourself in the first step. And this is something that can be done daily to help you not only understand your personality and how it currently stands, but potentially understand who you could become as you are trying to fill in those gaps and use your intellect appropriately, not necessarily to satisfy itself and to make yourself feel better like you know everything, but to use your ego and your conscious intellect to put everything in its proper place, such that your emotions are balanced with your rational intellect, and then those two things are balanced in your personality as a whole, and then you are someone who can go out and engage in the world, either at your job or with your family and in your social relationships, to the point to where you can make things better. And I'm going to end the video there. So thank you guys for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.